Hey guys, we're going to finish George Brown Class Clown today, the super burp. So let's do a review of what happened yesterday in chapters 10 and 11. Who remembers what happened last chapter? Now, sometimes if I don't remember, I like to look. So then you'll have to listen to the review. So sometimes I like to look back and just kind of like browse and skim the last chapter, see what words I see that might help me kind of figure it out. Daniel? So Louis kicked that big crab ball towards him and he scored a goal. I don't think I think he saved it, not scored it. So they're having a little bit of a rivalry there. And I see that, do you guys remember why he was upside down? Well, he was doing a handstand, but why, Quindell? Right, he had to burp and he stood upside down on his head like that. So he was trying to like, remember it said squelch the belch, stop the burp. All right, and so now we're on chapter 12 and we're gonna finish up and see how this super burp situation gets resolved. Let me zoom in. All right. At lunch, George sat with Chris, Alex, and Juliana. They were pretty nice kids, but not once for the rest of the not once for the rest of the day did George feel even one bubble in his belly. All through recess and art class, he felt 100% like an ordinary kid. Guys, you shouldn't have anything out if you're done with your cursive. Put your cursive away. Art class had been especially fun because the kids were starting to make their paper mache piñatas. George loved splashing around in the soupy, goopy paper mache paste as he built his piñata. Have you guys ever built piñata? Thumbs up if you have. Most of you haven't? Oh my gosh, you guys, it's so easy. Luke, if you guys have not done it before, okay, all you need is flour, like what you'd bake with, flour, water, and newspaper. That's it. Yeah. Uh, well, to finish it, you might need other things, but to make the paper mache paste right here, Adrian, so what you do is you put flour in a little bowl and then you can add water to it and mix it up so it becomes this little goopy stuff. And then you get strips of newspaper so you can cut it or tear it in strips. You dip it in the goop and then you can use your fingers like this. Like if this was my strip of newspaper, you could go like this and get the extra goop off. And then you could put that on something. Like if you put it on a balloon, around a balloon, then let it harden. It'll be paper mache like a piñata. And then you could stuff it with something and whack, boom. That would be a cool Christmas present to give somebody. Make them a piñata, put a little bit of candy or some little surprises in it. I bet your siblings would enjoy something like that. In fact, he was having so much fun that he didn't even get mad when Mike told him his skateboard piñata looked like a big white tongue, which it absolutely did not. George was actually feeling pretty good about things when the bell for dismissal rang, and then he heard Louis calling him. Hey, new kid, are you ready to show us what a hot skateboarder you are? Louis was mocking George, but so what? Sure, meet me outside, George told Louis. Yeah, right, Louis said. You'll probably sneak out the back entrance. Mike and Max laughed. George frowned. What did Louis expect him to do? Skateboard right here in the hallway? George put his backpack and his skateboard on the floor. Then he started to put on his helmet so he would be ready to skate as soon as he got outside. As he was buckling his helmet strap under his chin, George got a strange feeling in his stomach. A bunch of bubbles were suddenly bouncing up and down and all around in his belly. Oh no, not again. You see the bubbles. George tried desperately to stop the bubbles. He held his nose and clamped his mouth shut. Why don't you guys try that? Hold your nose and clamp your mouth shut. You think that's going to work? You could stop. But the bubbles were strong. He kept them down before, but George wasn't sure he could do it again. George, what's wrong? Alex asked. Your face is turning purple. The bubbles ping-pong pinged their way up out of George's stomach. They boing, bing, boinged their way to his chest. They bing, boing, binged their way up his throat, and then George let out the loudest burp in the history of Edith B. Sugarman Elementary School. In fact, it was possibly the loudest burp ever burped in the history of all elementary schools. A super duper mega burp. The burps at the ice cream shop and in his classroom were baby burps compared to this one. Suddenly, all the talking in the hallway stopped. Everyone turned to stare at George. It wasn't me, George declared, but there was no hiding it. George was the big burper. Everyone had heard it. Now everyone was laughing. And then suddenly George's feet wanted to jump on his skateboard right here in the middle of the school. George tried to stop them by grabbing onto Alex's shoulder. Are you okay? Alex asked. Hold on, before I keep reading, remember all of those emotion words we were looking at? Instead of just happy, sad, mad, scared, what other emotions do you think he's feeling right now? Aaliyah D? Probably feeling embarrassed, yeah. I would think so too, because a lot of times I've heard kids burp or toot in class and they do get embarrassed, although we all do it. Morgan? Well, hold on, let me do some emotion words and I'll come back to you for a prediction. Luke? So you might be a little depressed more than sad because, like, whoa, now everybody's looking at me and I was trying to do a better job this time. Morgan, what's your prediction, Daniel? Okay, so because he was embarrassed, he's going to skate away on his skateboard and get in trouble for doing that in the school. That's your prediction? Okay. Elizabeth? Oh, another prediction. What is it? Oh, so remember he wished on a shooting star, and that's what started the burps. That people would, that he wanted to make people laugh, and so that's what started the burps. So maybe if he wishes on a shooting star again, he'll stop the burps. It says George couldn't stop himself. The super burp had taken over. He tried to keep holding on to Alex, but all at once his hands let go. They weren't cooperating. Uh-oh. And neither were his feet. They leaped onto the board, and before he knew what was happening, George was rolling down the halls. Elizabeth was right with that. Or wait, did you say Morgan was right with that? Yep, sorry. He shifted his weight to the back of the board and whee! He took off into the air and turned the board around in a circle, a perfect 180. Satisfied? George shouted as he passed by Louie. George! Mrs. Kelly came racing out of the classroom. Get off that skateboard right now! But George didn't get off. He couldn't. It was like his feet were cemented to the board. Woo-hoo! George shouted as he popped up into the air in another ollie. Kids started clapping and whistling. Check this out! George called to the kids. He turned the corner ready to do an awesome pop shove it. I don't know what that move is, but I don't know. I can look it up. George looked over his shoulder. He could see Mr. Trainer running after him. Who's Mr. Trainer? Gym teacher. I'll put a stop to this, Mr. Trainer shouted to Mrs. Kelly, but George was too fast for him. Practically every kid at Edith B. Sugarman Elementary School was trailing after George and his runaway skateboard. George jumped up and landed back down on the skateboard. As he passed her office, the principal came running out into the hall. George Brown, there is no skateboarding allowed in school, she shouted as he whizzed by. So Morgan was right. George knew that. The principal didn't understand. The burp was in control, not George. So I don't remember where I was. I'm going to start here. George knew that. The principal didn't understand. The burp was in control, not George. He turned his head and tried to say, I'm sorry, but nothing came out. George, watch out, someone shouted. George thought it sounded like Alex. When George turned back around, he saw what the problem was. He was heading straight for the art room at the end of the hallway. The door was open. George was going too fast to stop. Besides, the magic burp wouldn't let him. Whoa! He shouted as he whizzed into the room and smashed into a table. Ride over. Whoosh! Suddenly, George felt a big bubble pop right in the middle of his stomach. The air just rushed right out of him. The super burp had disappeared, but George was still here, left to deal with the mess. He fell off his skateboard and landed on his rear end just as a pail of icky, sticky paper mache goo tipped over. Yucky white paper mache rained down over George's head. George sat there feeling the slippery, ooey gooey white paste slither down his neck and ooze down under his shirt. It dripped on George's face and into his mouth. Ugh! It was the most disgusting thing George had ever tasted. And considering he'd once mixed tuna fish with chocolate ice cream and ketchup, that was saying a lot. Hey, check it out, Alex said. George is a human pinata. The kids were all crowding in the doorway. Nice job, new kid, Louie said in a mean voice. George sighed. New kid, there were those two words again. You're in some mess now, Louie told George. George sat there for a minute, staring up at Louie. He didn't say a word. What could he say? Louie was right. George, Mrs. Kelly exclaimed as she ran into the art room. Why would you do that? Just what got into you? George sighed. It was actually what had gotten out of him that had made him act all goofy. But what was he supposed to say? The burp made me do it? That would just get him into more trouble. More trouble was the last thing George needed. And we only have a couple pages left, so we're going to finish this chapter right now with chapter 13. That afternoon, George walked home alone again. He'd had to stay after school to clean up the art room. That had taken a really long time since the principal wouldn't let Chris or Alex stay to help. By the time he'd finished, all the kids had gone home. Well, one thing was for sure, no one was going to call George the new kid anymore. Everyone knew his name, including the art teacher, the janitor, and the school principal, Mrs. McKeon. He'd spent a lot of time talking to her before she let him go home. Luke? Ooh, we got another prediction. What is it? Okay, so he maybe needs to tell them about his little wish. Do you guys all think this is happening because of the wish? Okay. Let's see. George reached up and scratched at his head. The paper mache paste was starting to harden in his hair. It was all clumped behind his ears, too. He was going to have to take a really long shower tonight. Then he'd have to clean up the dirty tub. And after that, his parents would talk about being responsible. George could just hear his mother asking, what happened to the new George? Worst of all, his parents would probably take away his skateboard for a week or two. Why me? George thought as he walked through Beaver Brook on his way home. Of all the millions of kids on the planet, why am I the one to get stuck with this stupid magic super burp? It didn't seem fair. George had a feeling he hadn't seen the last of the burp. It was going to come back, but who knew when? All George knew for sure was that he would have to work hard to stop it when it did, because if he let that burp out, there was no telling what might happen next. Dun, dun, dun. So let me grab the other book. I don't have the whole series, but I do have the first several. And I don't know, does anybody have any of these like in their desk? Nobody's reading it right now? All right, so the second one is called George Brown Class Clown Trouble Magnet. So I don't know if that has to do with burps or not. I don't know if they all do. I've only ever read the first one, so I don't know. The third one is called World's Worst Wedgie. So there we got some underwear going on. I don't have all of them, but I have number 5, George Brown Class Clown Wet and Wild. I've got 6, Class Clown Help, I'm Stuck in a Giant Nostril, so there's some boogers for you. Oh, you're welcome. Number 13 is How Do You Pee in Space? And the last one that I have in here is Snot Funny. No, it's not funny. I don't know about the 12 burps of Christmas. Maybe somebody else has that in their desk. But like I said, there's other ones I don't have. So if you like this one, you could always check the library at Haley or somewhere else and see if you can read some other George Brown books. Or you could read the companion series, which is called Katie Kazoo. That's the girl version. All right. Hope you liked it. See ya.